Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 314 for the 7th of Tishrei in a leap year. So if you've been following along the podcast for the past few days, your head might feel like it is about to explode. A lot of what we've been learning has been very abstract, very Kabbalistic in nature. And while I've been trying to the best of my ability to give over these concepts to you, it's not the easiest task, because the whole point of this podcast was to make the Tanya really relatable to you and relatable to me and accessible and all of that stuff. And some of these ideas, like, we can talk about them intellectually and we can try to understand them. And there is value in that. As I mentioned yesterday, there's value in wrapping your mind, in having your mind be busy with godly ideas, with trying to grasp the essence of our creation, of what is really going on here. But really, ultimately, together with that, I think that there's a certain humility that comes along with that, in coming to understand that as much as we can speak about these concepts, we cannot really grasp them in the fullest sense of the words, by nature of the fact that we're human. So this isn't something that we should really feel too horrible about, because the truth is, and this is kind of a big topic of what we've been learning and what we're going to continue to learn today, is that God created us specifically as finite beings with subjective minds and seeing things from our perspective. And there's kind of like this ultimate objective reality, we can say, that is God's perspective of the world. But then there's our subjective world as well, which is just as equally real. Like, God wanted us to have this subjective reality, and this was kind of like the whole point of creation. So when we talk about these ideas that really ultimately there is nothing but God is the only true reality, everything is nullified to godliness and all that stuff. On the other hand, there is a world, and we've spoken about this in Shari Yechud V'Emunah and throughout the Tanya. We've been talking about it in the past few days, that there is this thing called the world, and there is a thing called Tzimtzum, this idea of that God constricting himself in order for there to be another world. And we spoke about this, how this is true from, how do we reconcile these two things, is that there's different perspectives. There's God's perspective, and then there's our perspective. And so from our perspective, there very much is a world. There very much is a separation between us and him. And that is not by accident. God wanted that. God wanted us to have this separation, have this alternate perception, but from that alternate perception, from that sense of self, from that sense of independence from him, to come from there to a consciousness of godliness, to a consciousness of the true reality of the world, and to infuse our multiplicity, to infuse our brains, our independent brains, with this transcendence. So if that sounds like a paradox, it kind of is. It's kind of like, how do you have a reality which is both separate from God, but yet one with God at the same time, and live in a consciousness like that? That is kind of like the paradox of our existence. And that's what we're going to continue to talk about a little bit today. And this is again, we're in the middle of this very deep and dense epistle in Iggeres HaKodesh, the Epistle 20. And today we're going to be grappling with this idea of that, well, just for context of where we're at, is so far in this epistle, we've been talking about the idea of ex nihilo, and we've been talking about exploring the origins of ex nihilo, and like sort of like in the spiritual map of creation. And when we look at the whole map of the worlds above us and our world and all those things, like the underpinnings of all of creation, where does ex nihilo come from? How does it come about? How do things come into being, something from nothing? Like, where in the scope of godliness, of the study of godliness, does this happen? And we've explored this from a number of dimensions so far. We've explored this from the aspect of looking at how it comes from the level of malchus of Atzilus, and how within the malchus of Atzilus, to be specific, it comes from the vessels within the malchus of Atzilus. We talked about the kav, which gives that ultimate power, how the kav seeps into those kelim, into those vessels, and pierces through the partition in malchus of Atzilus and goes down into all the other worlds. So for more detailed explanation of all of this, please go back and listen to the past few episodes where I detail this a lot more. But today we're going to bring up a question that seems to kind of challenge all of this, challenge what we've learned so far in this regard in terms of the creation ex nihilo, and then we're going to resolve the question. So the question that will come up is that throughout this discussion of ex nihilo creation, one recurring theme that keeps coming up is just a recognition of how unique this type of creation is, and contrasting it with causality, and seeing how really the kind of more natural way that things come into being in our worlds or even in the spiritual worlds is in a more causal way, in a cause and effect kind of way. And this creation ex nihilo is something else. And that creation ex nihilo is really something so unique and so different and so powerful that really it could only come from God. It can only come not only from God, but from the essence of God himself. So the question that's going to come up today is that, it's very nice that we've been talking about like this map of godliness and like where does ex nihilo come from, and does it come from here, does it come from there, and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, another recurring theme that we've been having throughout the Tanya that we've come up is that God ultimately, on his essential level, is transcendent. God is not affected by the world around him. The Rambam talks about this, that while we may be affected by God, and while God's light, God's radiance may be affected by the world and by us and all those things, God himself, the emanator, not the light, but the actual emanator, where that light comes from, is detached, is removed. And so if this is the case, how is he both here, and how is it that this ex nihilo creation happens, which implies the immanent nature of God, while at the same time God is totally transcendent? So let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains this, and maybe it will be a little bit more clear as to what I'm trying to get at here through looking at how the Alter Rebbe explains it all. So the Alter Rebbe begins, and again, for context, we're still in the middle of Epistle 20 of Iggeres HaKodesh. So the Alter Rebbe begins, and he says, however, what's the however? So it's like we've been talking about this whole creation ex nihilo, and that it comes from the kav and the kalim. And yesterday we talked about the radiance of the radiance of the radiance and all of that stuff. So today the Alter Rebbe says, however, okay, all those things aside, the actual essence and being of the light of the infinite one, the Or Ein Sof, does not have any limitation of space at all. So it's very nice. We're talking about these different radiances and these different vessels and stuff being responsible for creating space and time and all of creation. But when it comes to the actual essence of the light, the essence of like where all of these radiances are coming from, the Or Ein Sof, it is not bound by space at all, but rather it encompasses all the worlds equally. And when we say encompasses all the worlds, so just to understand that, it's in Hebrew, it's Sovev Kol Almin. We mistakenly might think that this is like, we might have an image in our head of this like surrounding light, like a bubble or something like that. That's like circular or something like that. But that's not what encompasses means, at least not in this context. In this context, when we say encompasses all the worlds, what that means is that it's equally there, but in a hidden manner in all the worlds. So we can say the word encompasses, or sovev, we can say is hidden, like present but hidden. So this light, this essential light, encompasses all the worlds equally. As it says, and this is from Yirmiyahu chapter 23, verse 24, V'et hashamayim v'et haaretz ani maleh. I fill all the worlds equally, uniformly. So this is God fills everything in an equal measure. And there is no, as it says in Tikkun Zohar, there is no place devoid of God, even in this physical world. So God is equally present in the spiritual worlds and the physical world, everything, everywhere, all at once, like that recent movie that came out. Just that he is found here in a way of makif and sovev, encompassing, encircling. So again, he's hidden. It's not something that we see, that's revealed. And as this is explained in Likutei Amarim, which we learned previously in chapter 48 of Likutei Amarim, meaning in the first part, meaning in Sefer Shel Beinanim, which we learned about way back when. So meaning to say that it's that this light, this essential light, is not found there in a way of extension and investment to vivify them and bring them into being something from nothing. So, right. So it's like, okay, so this is the question. This is where we get to the point in the text where we have the question, where we say that, like, on the one hand, we're saying that God's essential light is present in everything, but in a way that is hidden, in a way that's just encompassing, that he's found in everything in an equal measure. And if it's equal, it's sort of like it's without definition, and thus it's not there. It's not being invested in any particular thing to be able to bring it to life, something from nothing. So how does something from nothing happen? So we spoke about this previously. We said that this happens by way of a ha'ara de ha'ara de ha'ara, a radiance of a radiance of a radiance, etc., which comes from the kav, as we explained above, as we spoke about above. So just one interesting explanation of this radiance of a radiance of radiance that I recently heard that I thought was interesting to mention, to kind of give you a little bit more of a visual for this. What do we mean by a radiance of a radiance of radiance? So radiance number one would be like the sunlight, right? And then a radiance of a radiance might be where that sunlight hits a prism of some sort, and then that prism creates colors. So it's like it creates this like rainbow. So rainbow effect is the radiance of the radiance, because each time there's a radiance, there's another step removed, there's some like alteration in some way that happens in terms of that radiance. It's not like just the same light flowing through one space to another. Like I kind of mentioned something like that in a previous episode, where it's just like one light going into another room and then another room. It's actually, the truth is, after a little bit more research, it's a little more different than that each radiance does change somewhat, and that's why it becomes a new radiance. So radiance number one is just the radiance of the sun, the light of the sun. Radiance number two, so the radiance of the radiance, is where that radiance hits the prism and creates this rainbow effect. And then the third radiance, the radiance of the radiance of the radiance, is actually where the perceiver comes in. It's actually what you see, where your eyes see, what the perceiver sees. So you're experiencing that rainbow, which is something that's going to be different for each particular person. So it's more particular in that way. So in any effect, so going back to our text, so basically we said that this like Ein Sof light, so we were like saying how it's essentially, it's not revealed. It's found in everything, but in a sovev way, in a way that is concealed. But so how is it that this Ein Sof light creates something from nothing? It's through a ha'ara de ha'ara de ha'ara. It's through a radiance of a radiance of a radiance that comes from the kav. Ultimately, the kav is really such an essential part of Chassidus. The kav is like really this magical thing. It's like this transmitter of this essential light. It smuggles this essential light into places that it otherwise could not get. So this kav transmits this radiance of a radiance of a radiance. So that's the first way by which, this is answer number one to how it is that ex nihilo happens from an essential place in God. It's saying that ex nihilo isn't directly the Or Ein Sof, but rather it's a radiance of a radiance of radiance of the Or Ein Sof that comes through the kav. Okay, now the second point, the second answer that comes up here is that also the other thing to remember is that this light, the Ein Sof light that encompasses and encircles all the worlds, all four worlds of Atzilus, Bria, and Yetzirah, and Asiya equally, this light radiates into the inner kav through the kalim of the 10 spheres of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. So basically, so again, the vessels, so again, we're going back to kind of what we've been discussing before, is that this essential light, even though it essentially is hidden. It essentially is sovev. Nevertheless, it does get radiated, and thus its essence does get transmitted in some form, some way, through the inner kav. And when we say inner kav, we mean revealed. So just like outer and sovev and transcendent is concealed, the inner means revealed. So it's revealed in the inner kav through the vessels. So the kav and the vessels really smuggle in this transcendent light through the 10 spheros, specifically of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. And this is kind of what we spoke about yesterday, about past the partition, bursting through the partition into these 3 other worlds that are below Atzilus. And through this radiance in the vessels, it gives them the power to create something from nothing. And so just to reiterate that. So we gave 2 answers as to how it is that creation ex nihilo happens, even though essentially the essential light, which is the source of ex nihilo, is totally transcendent and hidden and everything like that. So it's like, how does ex nihilo happen? It happens in 2 ways we described. There's 2 ways this happens. One is through the kav, through the radiance of the radiance of the radiance of the light that comes through the kav. And secondly, because not only does the radiance of the radiance of the radiance of the light get transmitted down through the kav, but the light itself, the essence of the light, actually does come through somewhat in a revealed way. It gets into the kav by way of the kelim, by way of the vessels. So the vessels really have this special power to be able to smuggle this essential light, a somewhat of an aspect of this essential light, into the kav. And through it being revealed in the vessels, this gives them the power to create something from nothing, which is how they are able to create something from nothing, as we've spoken about in previous episodes. And now, here, concluding this idea, since the creation comes through the vessels, this is why we see that really the creatures are created in a way of multiplicity and diversity and limitation and finitude, especially when we talk about the letters, which we spoke about above. So the letters are even more finite and even more diverse than the vessel. So basically to reiterate that last point. So basically the reason why we live in a world that is so diverse and so has so much multiplicity and finitude and all of that is because it comes from the kelim and from the letters, which are by nature all about multiplicity and division and finitude and all that stuff. Like, that's what vessels are. So that's it for today. So once again, I know these things are kind of abstract, and I know that it's like, as much as, it's like I'm trying to explain these ideas and trying to understand them to the best of our ability, they are abstract because we are stuck. And again, it's like we can try to understand these as best as we can, and maybe we can get to the point of like being able to map them out. But at the end of the day, and that's kind of like the point of what we're learning here, we're stuck in our human minds. We're stuck in that ha'ara de ha'ara de ha'ara. We're stuck in the reflection of the reflection of the reflection. So we're learning about the source of this reflection, but we're not seeing the source of the reflection. So it's sort of like we're seeing the rainbow, but we're not seeing the original light that the rainbow comes from. We're just learning about that light that the rainbow comes from, which is something. And that is the kind of the idea of Chabad Chassidus, is to give us this consciousness of the rainbow didn't come in its own from itself. The rainbow is actually an essential light. So I hope that was enlightening, and we'll continue along these lines tomorrow, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.